In all my years of conquest, violence, slaughter, it was never personal. But I'll tell you now, what I'm about to do to your stubborn, annoying little planet, you're gonna enjoy it very, very much.
On your left. Avengers!
And that is probably the even more than the friggin' movie itself, even more than if you catch it on Disney Plus. But those reaction videos to the climax of Avengers Endgame still racking up views even years later after the movie has been released. But why? Why, you may ask? Well, that's one of the things that we will discuss tonight on the MCU review. I am Elliot Serrano, king of Chicago Geeks, one of the MCU ReVU Cru. And let's bring in the rest of the crew. First off, he is the one of the main hosts of Caffeinated Comics, the host podcast that features the MCU review. He is John Clark.
How are you, Elliot?
I'm okay. I'm feeling a little better. I think things got a little emotional when we were talking about the Picard series finale yesterday.
Oh yeah, I kind of want to just keep talking about that because watching Endgame reminded me so much of the cues that Picard would take of looking at this movie and going, "This is how you end a franchise and serve every single character." Picard is the end game of Star Trek.
Yep. And there are a lot of parallels here. Absolutely. So for those who haven't heard it, you can listen to John and I talking about the series finale of Picard, as well as the season finale of The Mandalorian on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Welcome, Susan. Welcome, Elimond. Welcome, everyone who's watching us on Facebook.com, on YouTube, and streaming on Twitch TV. Our next crew member is my ride or die, my co-host on the show that got all this started. Shaken Not Heard. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Dave Pino. How you doing, Dave?
I'm all right. I'm saying more of a myth than anything else.
It's been a while. We haven't been on air talking about this stuff for a while, so it's good to see you. I mean, I see you all the time, but back together, getting the band together to talk about something. We were hoping we'd be done by now with phase 3, but things, as I say, life gets in the way. So
you also started an Indiana Jones podcast in the middle of this.
Yeah, and we started an Indiana Jones podcast in the middle, which is also getting pushed back because of crazy stuff. Yes, and Moneypenny is also wondering when the hell we're getting back to that. And then finally, he is our resident mixologist who has made yet another themed drink for tonight's movie. He is Thomas Jutner.
Good evening, guys. How's it going?
I think we're doing well. Okay, hold on. I think I see. I'm trying to see what's going on. First, you've got. I want to say that's a Brooklyn Dodgers cap.
That is, yes.
And of course, you're wearing that in honor of Cap.
I'm wearing in honor of Cap, and it was Jackie Robinson Day last weekend. So, always good opportunity to celebrate him and his life and accomplishments. So.
And Dave, are you wearing the Marty McFly shirt from Back to the Future 3?
He's absolutely wearing.
Yes,
Marty.
I am. Yeah. This is a time travel movie, so I thought, what better reason to wear this than?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I'm completely underdressed. I'm wearing a Red Hot Chili Pepper shirt, which I probably should have worn for Captain Marvel. It was appropriate last movie.
Yeah, and I'm wearing my Avengers sweater from Heroes and Villains. I love this sweater. This is like my favorite sweater right now. So comfy. So yeah,
it's like a 83 socks style Avengers sweater that Elliot has on.
Yeah, well, I was looking at it. It's very hockey sweater.
Yeah, I like that about it.
Yeah.
Well, I will say I am a Cubs fan, but I am growing up on the South Side in the '80s. I am a fan of that era of White Sox jersey. They call them the Good Humor Man jerseys.
I've heard that name before, the Good Humor Man jerseys.
Yeah. I used to like, I remember the Hitman, Julio Cruz scoring that winning run to give the White Sox the division that year, the win and ugly team. Yeah.
Yes. I famously, my birthday is in October, and that was my dad was behind by my mom's side for every minute that I was being born, except for the 3 hours that the White Sox were playing the Orioles in the ALCS. So,
well, I already broke my own rule. I've turned this show into Sox talk. I didn't even mean to. We're supposed to be joined by Stephen Brown, our resident Avengers fan, but he is also Is he working?
Lately, yeah. As Caffeinated Comics listeners know, they are really going 150% on this Kickstarter about the Galloping Ghost documentary, which we covered a couple weeks ago. Steven had a lot to say about that because I had laryngitis on the air. So we're waiting to see if he can still make it because he's made all the other 3 Avengers. We're asking him to assemble.
Well, if he can't make it, that's to be given. I mean, he's also an EMT, so the
Blow
guy.
a conch horn.
Yeah.
Right. Excuse that he's stuck in the quantum realm for this one.
Oh yeah, and I have yet to see Quantum Mania, so whatever. But I do.
Yeah, I apologize. I saw that it was available to buy and assumed it was Disney Plus because I assumed it was still 2021. Disney cared about Disney Plus.
Disney's busy because cutting another 3,000 jobs. So but I did have for today. I also prepared. I have my collection of Avengers. These are the little, not baubles, but the figures that you got in your Happy Meals at McDonald's. I think, Dave, you gave me the cap.
Give you the Winter Soldier one.
The Winter Soldier one, yeah. This one you gave me, right? Yeah. I got the cap on my own. And the Ant-Man. I think I found the Ronin here at a flea shop, at a thrift store or something like that. All right. So anyway, the topic today is Avengers Endgame. We led off with that reaction video that was taken. One of the many reaction videos that you'll find online. I'm telling you, it's the same reaction I had at the theater I saw it at. I mean, and I went to an advanced screening full of people who were there to review the film, and it was crazy. It was just crazy. The only time you're going to see anything even approaching that in a Marvel film will be in the Spider-Man No Way Home. But beyond that, the emotional impact of that movie, that end, the Russo brothers pretty much bringing together an entire narrative that was 10 years in the making. Pretty impressive. So why don't we start off with what we always do? Again, for those folks who have not seen the MCU review in the past, we are going through every movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Iron Man up to the present. If you go to Facebook.com, YouTube, you can find every previous episode that we've done, starting with Iron Man. Point I need to make: if you go to our YouTube page, if you look at the YouTube page and it says this page has no content, that's a lie. That's a bald-faced lie. You have to click on the live tab, and there you will find every episode, because we live stream every episode. Hit the live tab, and you will see every episode that we've done, starting from the beginning. But again, if you're watching us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch doesn't archive us, so that sucks. But still, you are welcome to comment, interact with us, tell us what you thought about the movie. But this is when we start off with what we call the 2-minute MCU review. That's when each of our crew members give a quick 2-minute, retrospective review, synopsis, or opinion on how they felt about the movie. If you watched it just recently, has your opinion changed since you saw it the first time? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? If you didn't get a chance to watch it, really, how do you remember the film? Let's start with you, Dave.
I watched it yesterday, and this is one of the best, one of the better ones. I think it's a real technical accomplishment, both as far as the effects and everything, of course, but then also, like you touched on earlier, just the culmination of this big universe of films. And all the storylines and character arcs that they resolved with this film in really satisfying ways. And I would say that, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I personally know a number of people that they kind of pieced out with the MCU after this movie, because it felt like it's like a movie that really couldn't be topped. And I think Part of it is all of the phases, and this is phase 4, correct, or 3? You guys remember?
Or I'll show you the 3 sign, my friend.
Okay, sorry, the video froze up for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Although the second Spider-Man is considered, I think, actually the end of this phase, sort of strangely enough.
It's the epilogue, so they say.
Yeah.
Right.
But I feel like it was from the start, almost from the very start, the narrative and kind of everything that all of the previous, however many films were building towards was very clear, with Thanos being established pretty early on as like the big bad villain that everything's building up to. And maybe since then it hasn't been as clear. And even though they do obviously have a plan, they're not just winging it as they go along. But the narrative and sort of what everything is about post this film, or I guess even post Far From Home, it has not been quite as clear. And I think also with this movie, obviously giving closure to Tony Stark's character and Steve Rogers, who I think were huge draws for just the interest in the MCU, Iron Man and Captain America, but also the actors playing them, with them being, phased out and getting their satisfying endings, to their character arcs in this movie. I think a lot of people just sort of lost interest, or the interest waned a little bit. But I do agree with the idea that this is such a huge film and such a culmination of everything, that it really does feel like it'd be very difficult for them to try to match this film in the future. As far as, obviously, as the success critically and just everything behind it, the narrative and just the build up and all the material that went into leading up to this film. I do think, if there was one MCU movie, not that I agree that this should have been the case, but if you're going to pick one MCU film that arguably should have gotten a Best Picture nomination, it would have been this one. I still think it's kind of strange that Black Panther is the only one of the 20 some that there have been. But this one, I think, really easily would have deserved that nomination even more, if not for, just being sort of the capper of everything that's come since whenever this started, 2008. So yeah, this is a great movie. I think, everything, especially the ending, the final few scenes, beginning with, Iron Man, Tony Stark doing the snap and defeating Thanos. And then, of course, his subsequent death, and then the funeral and everything happening with Steve Rogers going back through time and reliving his whole life with Peggy Carter, is just what a cool way to end. It's not a big triumphant. It's sort of a quieter, but more strangely in that same way, more satisfying ending, having a quieter ending rather than a big bombastic, which I think with Cap being the first Avenger, it's almost more fitting that it's that quieter, more subdued ending, that rather than something really triumphant and setting up something going forward, because this is also I believe the first one that does not have a post-credit scene up till this point. So yeah, it's just a great movie, a great satisfying culmination of the previous few phases. And yeah, I love this one.
Tom.
Well, I'd have to agree with most everything that Dave said. I think that on the rewatch, I've come to like this one more and more than when it first came out. I think when it first came out, it was almost a little overwhelming because there's so much going on in this movie. And it's really long. So if you see it in the theaters, and maybe you have to take a bathroom break or something like that, and that can kind of break it up. But kind of watching it at home on Disney Plus, I mean, I was just into it. I was just kind of riveted by it. And a lot of what drives it is it has to be this really big movie, and it somehow manages to be multiple really small movies at the same time. I think the decision to split everyone up into these teams for the time heist was a really clever idea, because you got a chance to have smaller engagements and smaller stories play out. And then to have the first half of the final confrontation with Thanos be just well, I don't know if you could say original three because we have Incredible Hulk, but of the main original three films of Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, of have it just be those three against Thanos, really worked out. And then to have the other characters come in after that is kind of sends the message to the audience of like, these three started it, and now here's everything that has kind of come from it. And also came at a great time. It came in kind of 2019, and the idea of everybody kind of coming together at that time, I think, really spoke to audiences. And that final Avengers Assemble thing has been used many times, I've noticed, particularly in a political context and things like that. I think it was really funny because famously one time, I think former President Trump he retweeted something of his video that was himself as Thanos, like supposedly doing a snap, and everyone chimed in on Twitter at the time saying, it's like, what really happened in that movie immediately after that. And then someone did a mashup during the George Floyd protests, and then there was another one after the 2020 election. So that kind of getting everyone together and fighting back some bloated evil really appealed to everybody. So, but it's a great movie. I like it more every time I watch it. There's so much good stuff in it, and I can't wait to talk more about the individual pieces.
And John.
Yeah, this is a big ending. I don't think we've seen anything like this in film history. The closest thing I could compare it to is Return of the King. This massive ending that completely pays off everything that's built up. But this is even more impressive because Return of the King was written as a book when the rest of Lord of the Rings was written. In this, as we mentioned many times before, they're not adapting anything that's ever been in print. So they have to figure out how to pull these over 20 films together with multiple characters and completely satisfy everyone, which it manages to do. And as I said, it manages to be, it's so big. It's 3 different films. It's this depressing drama about trauma for an hour. And then it is a Back to the Future 2 style time travel movie. And then it's the biggest superhero fight you have ever seen, ever depicted on screen. And that is the weight it also has to bear because, like Dave was saying, you can't top it. And it's the perfect time for Marvel to end. It had been 10 years, it had been 20 movies. We had grown up in a world of trilogies, really. It was like 3 was a lot. 20 was beyond. And for Marvel to go, well, we're going to keep going. I think it's been harder and harder to keep people to that style of momentum. It reminds me of crossovers in the comics because when crossovers happened in the 80s, it was this massive deal and nobody knew how to process it. And then the letdown becomes so precipitous that Marvel, certainly in the last 10 years, has fallen prey to, well, we'll just have another event and another event. And you end up never ending your events. It's like, oh, in the last issue, we're going to set up the next event. And as jaded as you say of like, oh, you don't even finish your stories, that's creatively bereft. I realize this movie is what happens when you don't do that. Is like you bring it in for such an ending that everybody's like, okay, we can go home. There's one little tease of Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy, which honestly isn't really paid off in Thor: Love and Thunder, which comes 3 years after this movie. So it's a blessing and a curse that it ended this well. Certainly, whatever they're planning now is a little cryptic, as you said, a little myopic, and we don't know because we don't know what the clear story is. And not to delve too much into what's happening now, but with Jonathan Majors being in trouble they've put their entire future of the franchise on him as the villain. And this is a guy who's losing work left and right. So I don't think we're ever going to have a clear mountaintop the way we did in Avengers Endgame.
And to echo what all of you guys have said, it was. You will see that J.J. Abrams and his screenwriting crew are going to try to capture some of that magic in Rise of Skywalker, but it's not gonna work. I mean, you have Chris Thierry, who was a screenwriter, has a screen credit on Endgame. He would be one of the. I think I forgot the name of his co-writer. Also worked on the Rise of Skywalker, and you could tell they were like, okay, let's do that whole thing. Let's do the same thing. The big climax, it looks like things aren't going to go our way, but then the big rally at the end, and it just didn't work. They just couldn't quite pull it off. So you have to give the Russo brothers a lot of credit. They had a load to carry. Joss Whedon from his work on all his television shows. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, he was the one who introduced the whole idea of a season-long story where you introduce a big bad and it pays off at the end of the season. And he started that with Avengers, with the different Avengers movies, Avengers, Age of Ultron. He was supposed to do the next ones, but then all his issues occurred and the Russos picked up the ball and ran with it and did a hell of a job. I'll tell you, they did a hell of a job with it. I would also say the last time I was that emotional watching a credit sequence where it was essentially the actors, you saw their signatures on the screen as the music was playing. The last time I saw that was Undiscovered Country, and we were saying goodbye to the original Star Trek cast. And that was emotional as well. And they just knew how to push those buttons. And now I think the problem, though, if there's any downside to this film, and we're already seeing it set the bar impossibly high. It's just, this movie beat Avatar as the all-time moneymaker for a bit before it got dropped again by the re-release of Avatar. But then it's now... Marvel movies have to make $1 billion for them to be considered successful, which is ridiculous. They have to be these huge, gigantic moneymakers to be successful. The stakes have to be incredible. That's the biggest criticism we've heard about Quantumania, that the movie's low stakes. It just set the bar just too freaking high, and you can't even get back to the nice, fun stories that, well, I will say they're doing it on Disney Plus. I'll give them credit for that.
Yeah, well, you also can't take away when this came out. This came out summer 2019. This is the last big movie, I think. Because we never quite recovered movies from the lockdown.
Rise of Skywalker came out December 2019.
Yeah, but I agree with Elliot. Rise of Skywalker does not live up to Avengers Endgame.
No, which makes Rise of Skywalker the last movie that a lot of people saw. I think it was the last movie I saw before we all went into lockdown. So,
Elliot, to your comparison of the Rise of Skywalker being a culmination of everything, in the way that this is, I shudder to think what Endgame would have been like if, with every movie, the director of that respective movie tried to completely contradict what happened in the film before.
Right. A lot of Rise of Skywalker was not paying off the other movies, was retconning. It was paying off one movie and denying another movie.
Exactly.
That's one thing that this movie does exceptionally well. If you think about some of the deep cuts of payoffs, like we haven't heard much on the Howard Stark front since what? Civil War. Civil War was 2016. So 3 years went by to kind of pay off that thread. There's a bunch of like little stuff that happens in this movie that are payoffs too. I mean, we hadn't really seen hide nor hair of Peggy Carter as a major storyline in a while. So picking up a lot of the threads that had been left hanging from not just past Avengers movies, but across the MCU was really a big part of this, and kind of, I think, adds to the satisfaction.
Absolutely right, Tom. You're absolutely right. And again, credit to the Russos, although I think it helps when you have that sort of continuity with the production crew. I mean, the Russos were, when you consider they did Winter Soldier, which then led to Civil War. I call Civil War Avengers 2.5, right? And then they pick up after that, boom, 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 boom. The Star Wars films didn't have that sort of continuity going on with the creative teams. And yes, J.J. Abrams was not only trying to wrap up the sequel trilogy, but also reconcile the entire Skywalker saga, 9 movies, which, you know what? I enjoyed it. This is funny. The weird thing, I still enjoyed Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull more than Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, I agree.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Rise of Skywalker, I'm done after an hour.
I try to watch. You watch the first half hour, and like, yeah, I go, oh, okay, that's good. I put it on Disney Plus. I go, that beginning fun. It's really fun in the beginning for the first, 45 minutes, and then it gets bogged down with stuff.
But yeah,
So-
Rise of Skywalker, and I don't want to turn this into a Rise of Skywalker hate cast, but Rise of Skywalker, the only movie I remember that lost me at the hour mark, because the hour mark is when Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting on the ruins of the Death Star in the ocean.
Mhm.
And at that moment, I go, well, this movie's over, right? And then I realized it had been an hour. The only other movie I can think of that I did that about was Wolverine Origins. Because at the hour mark in Wolverine Origins, he's got the adamantium and he fights Sabretooth again. And I'm like, well, we're done, right? And then the second hour was this just chaos of characters that went nowhere. And I don't like that about Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker ends with, like a Borg Queen Palpatine pointing at Star Destroyers in the cloud. That's my only memory of how the Skywalker saga ends.
And you're mentioning Wolverine too, because that will give us the
Also,
Deadpool.
not a good one.
Yeah, that will give us the Deadpool that does not talk, which Ryan Reynolds spent a lot of time trying to live down, and finally,
Well, the story behind that I thought was so crystal clear was that he was already working on the Deadpool movie, and Fox said, "Hey, good news. We put Deadpool in the Wolverine movie, so you can be in that." And he read the script and said, "I'm not doing this." And they said, "If you don't do this, we'll hire somebody else, and they'll be Deadpool from now on." So that's why he's in it.
Oh.
But and again, so not his fault.
Not his fault. But hey, you know what? He helped the Wrexham club in Wales finally get promoted to the Premier League. So
Did they get promoted? I was watching his documentary with Rob McElhenney, but the season ends before anything happens.
Yeah, the season ends. They don't make it. The season 2 that they're filming now. Well, spoiler: the Wrexham AFC does end up getting promoted. So
It's the real life Ted Lasso.
it's a real life Ted Lasso. All right. So before we turn this into Ted Lasso cast, I know, Tom, you have created a themed drink for our movie today. Why don't you tell us about it while I pull up the MC ReVU Cocktails account?
There we go. Some lovely drinks on there. So this one, Dave asked me a question at the beginning as to what the white creamy stuff on the top is, and that is just foam. That is just pineapple foam. The pineapple juice is one of the ingredients in this cocktail. It's 1 ounce of pineapple juice, 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice, 1/2 ounce of cinnamon syrup, 1/2 ounce of your orange liqueur of choice, and 2 ounces of a tequila. Now, I'm trying to come up with something for this particular movie, because this is such a big movie. How do you wrap it all up? And I kind of came back to the ending of Steve Rogers traveling back in time to be with Peggy, to have his soldier coming home from the war moment after sort of suffering so much. And I started thinking about, well, what kind of drinks were people drinking after World War II in the United States? And, we like to think of the idea of, well, they all sat down and had a really stiff drink and they drank whiskey and things like that. And we imagine them doing that to ease the trauma. And not exactly. While classic cocktails like the martini got absurdly high in alcohol content compared to, I believe that's what Elliot's drinking tonight, if I'm correct. Yeah, I spotted that. Yeah, that's right. So while the stuff like the martini went up, that's where you get the 5-to-1, the 7-to-1 martini ratio. The other thing that people were drinking when they got home from World War II was tiki drinks. They were drinking these cocktails with all kinds of different syrups and fruit juices and pineapple fronds and little umbrellas in them because it was time to relax. It was time to get away from the ordinary life and be back in the South Pacific again. But relaxing. It's also a time period when, in addition to rum kind of coming back into fashion, you really start to see tequila come into ordinary American usage. You see, I think the margarita comes out sometime. I could be, I don't want David Wondrich to yell at me on this one, but it's sometime in the post-war era, probably either in the late 40s or in the 50s. I'm not 100% sure. Drinks like the tequila sunrise come into fashion and begin to spread across the country. So you really start to see the marketing of tequila on a broad level. And that's what I did here, is I essentially made a cinnamon pineapple margarita. I did a little bit of a trick with mine. I did sometimes for my orange liqueur, I like to sub out bitter grapefruit liqueur. That's just something I like my drinks more bitter, so that's just my preference. And also with the cinnamon syrup, I get a little bit of that Don the Beachcomber Don's Mix thing going on. But Dave is drinking his. I think Dave used triple sec. What's your review, Dave?
It's delicious. Reminds me of more than a couple of drinks I had in Hawaii last year.
There you go.
I also love the blend of the pineapple and cinnamon aroma when you lift the glass up to your mouth.
Tom, for those of us who don't have cinnamon syrup, how would you make it?
It's quite easy. So you need just plain white sugar, water, and cinnamon sticks. So what you do is I usually make, I do a 1.5 to 1 sugar to simple syrup, sugar to water. So I take half a cup of water, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, and then 4 or 5 whole cinnamon sticks. And you throw that in a pot. I have a real little one that I use, and you heat that up on the stove. You don't have to bring it to boiling point, but you have to get it up hot enough so that all of the sugar dissolves into the water. And then what you do is you take that and you pour that into a jar or some other kind of container, and you seal it up, and you just let that sit on your counter overnight. And by the next day, it's ready to go. And then you'll have cinnamon syrup for this drink, for all your zombies or your jet pilots or your hyperspace pilot that we had for Captain Marvel. So, yep.
And what are we calling this drink?
We're calling this it's been a long, long time. It's nice to have that song on or slow dance as you relax and finally take it easy after your struggles. So that's what this is about.
And if you want to see this drink and the many others that Tom has created for the MCU ReVU, you can go to Instagram.com/ReVU Cocktails. It's ReVU Cocktails, where not only will you see the different Marvel themed drinks, but also I see you have a 3 dots and a dash up there. You've put up a couple other martinis and the like. Always fun to check out that account. And at some point, I think we're making a book, aren't we, Tom?
Yeah, we're going to try to put this all together into a book of all the different MCU drinks. I don't believe I've tweaked many of these since they came out, but yeah, I think what's the number up to on the Instagram page? It's quite a lot.
You've got quite a few up here. Yeah, I'm looking 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. You've got at least 30 some.
Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6,
I see
7,
36
8,
posts. I should just look at the posts. 36
9,
posts. So there.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I have 18 specific MCU specific drinks, in addition to the 2 Indiana Jones drinks that are currently up there.
Ah, yes.
And the various drinks that it took me almost a year to do my first old fashioned, and then I have 1 cup of coffee, one cup of coffee that I did.
Speaking of having a cup of coffee, he looks like he could sure use one. Let's welcome to the show John's co-host, regular co-host on Caffeinated Comics. You can follow him on social media as the Brave Butter Pecan. He is Stephen Brown.
Hey, hi. Thank you. Sorry for being late.
No, you're good. You're good.
I just
That's
got
a
off
3-hour
work.
movie. You had plenty of time to come on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's how it goes. How's everybody? Dave, your shirt is amazing. No notes. You look great.
Thank you.
Which is, now, mind you, folks, if you're listening to this show as the audio version and the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, you're missing all the fun imagery. The way we dress up when John shows off his toys later, as well as what baseball cap is Tom Chetner going to wear. But Stephen, since you just joined us and you are our resident Avengers expert, real quick, give us your 2-minute retrospective on Avengers Endgame.
I think for me, like the biggest thing was having rewatched them both recently. Infinity War is a better movie, but I think Endgame was a harder thing to pull off. I think it has a lot of problems with it, but it shouldn't have worked. None of this should have worked. And it's the fact that it's passable and it's entertaining and it kind of mostly makes sense and you can follow the story. And if you don't think about it too hard and you squint your eyes, it just kind of works. I think they pulled off. I think they pulled it off. I don't think they quite hit it out of the park, but it could have fallen so short. And we're talking, how many years of movies is this? 20 years of MCU movies or 15 years? 10 years, right?
Oh, 10? It feels like 20.
It
20
feels like
movies,
20.
years, yeah.
20
Well, we're
movies, 10
coming
years.
up on 15 now. This is 4
That's
years.
crazy. Yeah. So I think giving them a 10-year, if you had told me what they were going to do 10 years from now, I would have said they're going to fuck it up. And if you showed me what they did, I would have thought there's no way it's going to be this good. I think the stuff that hit in the theater still hits at home. Cat picking up Mjolnir is still going to be one of the greatest cinematic moments of all time. It's like they checked a lot of boxes and they tried to do time travel and it mostly works. It's messy, but it works. But I give them credit for pulling it off. DC can't even get the car out of the garage and Marvel's going to space. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's not even like a fair fight. And I want so desperately to like DC movies, but they just can't seem to figure it out. And I don't know why they can't.
It's like the Fast and the Furious movies. They actually took a car into space.
Yeah, and those is a great example. They've made 20 of those movies. They make one every year, every couple years, and they figured out how to keep making those movies, and they're ludicrous. The trailers alone are insane.
And they have a guy named Ludacris in them.
Yeah, of course they do. So it just kind of like shocks me that the other companies have a hard time, but maybe that's a whole different podcast.
Hey, Stephen, I'm interested to know, like, you and I saw this together.
Yeah,
when this came out.
Yeah,
and we were both completely overwhelmed. So it's interesting to me that now you're like, they didn't quite hit it out of the park. This has got some problems. What do you see in rewatching it that you're like?
I think it's not so much rewatching it that there's problems with Endgame specifically. It's kind of like it didn't leave anywhere for me for the MCU to go anymore. I had the same problem with professional wrestling when I was a kid. They did a match where like so many things went wrong and Undertaker should have killed Mankind and they should have stopped the match and it was crazy. But it was like, after that pay-per-view, we gave up on wrestling. Like all of me and my siblings used to be in wrestling and we all gave up on it after this match because it was so over the top and so crazy and he almost killed him. It was like nothing could top it anymore.
That was the Undertaker Mankind Hell in the Cell. That was what,
Yeah.
97, 98 or something like
Yeah,
that.
somewhere like late 90s.
Yeah.
And we checked in periodically, but never really went for it. But it's like a famous match because of its whole thing. We could talk a whole hour about that match. But this movie was very similar. Nothing since this movie has hit me as hard, except for maybe Black Panther. And nothing has excited me. Like, until they announce whatever the next Avengers property is, I'm just like passively just watching the MCU as it comes to me now. I'm not like speculating. I'm not really looking forward to anything. I think they did a really good job and it was a good capstone, but it just seems like we've been meandering ever since. You know, WandaVision was entertaining and Doctor Strange 2 I really liked, but it just seemed like there was a lot of we seem listless right now. And the thing I enjoyed about Endgame was it was the second time Marvel did the hat trick. The first time was the Avengers movie. They started Iron Man without a roadmap. And they said, can we get to Avengers with all these B-list characters? And they did it. They pulled it off and it worked. And then they teased Thanos. It wasn't even like a plan. That was a reshoot and it was a stunt double. It wasn't Idris Elba at the end of Avengers. It was a stunt guy in makeup. And it was just like, hey, maybe this is a thing. And then they pulled it off. Like, they pulled it off the first time with just doing the Avengers and that movie working. And then they pulled it off again like 10 or 5 years later with Infinity War and then Endgame, where it shouldn't have all come together and worked. And we could talk about the things that don't work. There's a lot of complaints about these types of movies, but I just think there's nothing really else like this that you can point to in any other movie. And the other things you would point to say it's like Star Wars doing this or Star Trek doing this, you're talking about properties that are now trying to do what Marvel did. You know what I mean? It's like everyone's trying to build the shared universe. The fucking Universal monsters want a shared universe. You know what I mean?
One
and
movie.
It's like,
One
they already
movie of a
had it. Like
shared
Abbott and
universe.
Costello already did this. So it's like you guys are visionaries. You forget your own history.
It's up. Stephen, to your point, I know John said from the beginning that Infinity War is like 3 movies, like packed into one. It's kind of like a minotaur, but it's like 3 animals, And you're right. It shouldn't work because, and I remember when I first saw Endgame in the theater, I was constantly readjusting myself. Yeah, it's like, okay, oh wait, we've turned into this comedic again. It's a time heist in the middle. I mean, the Russos were continuing their formula from Infinity War, where whatever character took center stage in the narrative, it became like their movie, and it was the same tone as what their movies were. So that whole time heist thing, it's essentially an Ant-Man movie.
I always say is like Endgame is all the Avengers that didn't get their own movies or needed to have a quick sequel, got it crammed into Endgame.
Right.
Hulk has a little story arc it could be his little movie. It could be Thor's little movie with the whole thing. It's the Guardians, it's Thanos. It's like they just had such an immense checklist to go through to make that movie work and to put all the plot points to bed, to wrap everything up. And then I remember watching like an extra or something on the DVD or one of the specials, and they were saying that the Russos went out of their way to make a reference to each of the MCU films in Endgame. So every single MCU film gets a direct reference in that movie. And it's like, why? You had all this other homework. Why are you doing extra bullshit? You know what I mean? But it's like, these were the exact right guys to do this movie at the exact right time. I don't know anybody else that could pull that off and juggle just the amount of storylines they had to juggle, and it's like, the things that frustrate me about the comic books now frustrate me about the movies, where the movies are now retconning stuff that happened. Like She-Hulk did this, where at the end of Endgame, Hulk's arm's all damaged and he's done. His arm is back. It's all fucked up. And then he gets an infusion from She-Hulk in like the first episode of her show. The next time we see the Hulk after Endgame, and he's like, "Oh, I'm fine. My arm's great. Look, I can be the Hulk again." It's like, okay. And then like Thor's immediately not fat anymore. You know what I mean? It's just like a lot of the stuff that it felt like they set up that was going to be things that the characters could then deal with, we didn't get a lot of. It's like the biggest thing was probably Sam Wilson getting the shield. But then they, instead of him Cap hands him the shield, but then the next show, the show is all about how, oh no, he ain't got the shield yet. We got half the season, he can't be Captain America yet. It's like, it just seems like they have no idea where they're supposed to go yet, and until they have an Avengers in place, they don't know what they're doing. And it's like they make that joke in all their movies now. Who are the Avengers? We don't know. And it's like, okay, but like, who are the Avengers? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but do we need to know who the Avengers are when now we have the Fantastic Four and the X-Men? I know you do.
Well, but I understand what you're saying, and I have a clear bias, but it's why Marvel's not going to do all of them. You know what I mean? They're not going to leave the pile of money on the table that is Avengers 5 or 6.
Well, and I think that's the point you're making. The Avengers are not the Avengers. The Avengers are the Marvel crossover.
They are for the movie, yeah. Oh, but see, I think that's part of my problem is, to me, the Avengers is just another book. I understand they're the guys that fight the big fight, right? But now it's just the crossover movie. It's the crossover property. Wherever the crossover is, it gets dumped in the Avengers. So instead of the Avengers fighting an Avengers problem with the Avengers, Doctor Strange is there, the Hulk is there, Spider-Man's there, because we're going to put all the A-team on the Avengers now. So it's like, I'm the Avengers fan because I love the comic a lot, and the movies are great, but the movies are kind of so far from the comics now that it's kind of its own thing for me. You know, it's like the Avengers are fun, and that's the property I'm most excited for in the MCU, but that's the stuff I'm excited most. It's for a very different reason than the comic. It's just not the same anymore because they're so different, and they should be. You know, I don't need to watch them recreate the exact same comics, we read 100 times already,
I also want to speak to my Shaken Not Heard co-host, Dave Pino, because when I was doing Shaken Not Heard with him, it was an educational process for me, learning how the movies differed from the books. And we thought we'd flip it here, having Dave on this show where he would learn how the movies differ from the books. And I think we've all come to the agreement that Hollywood has gotten very accustomed to just taking properties and just doing, using it as a springboard or a seed and then doing its own thing.
Yeah.
Beyond that. Like the Bond movies are nothing like the books. Yeah.
The Bond movies are nothing like the books.
Nothing like the books.
Yeah. And I think that's where maybe initially the Marvel movies, like you could make an argument like Iron Man 1 is a lot of extremists or whatever, you know what I mean? You can kind of point to what were the ingredients now, but people came into the comic book store when Infinity War came out and they'd say, what is this movie based on? And they'd grab the Infinity War comic book and it's like, that is nothing. That is a name only. The Age of Ultron was the same thing. It's the name only. These books have nothing to do with one another. And it's really it's ingredients. That's all it is. It's the Elliot's exactly right. It's they're grabbing stuff that happened in different books and using them in different properties. This happened in Guardians of the Galaxy, and we're gonna go put it over here with Young Avengers now. So it's not even that they'll stay consistent to their own books. I think it's kind of a free for all.
There is one thing though in the movie that happened in the comics, in the Infinity War comic, with Thanos and the snap. Except
that kind of stuff.
The person who watched him snap his fingers was the Mephisto. And I swear to God, Mephisto is constantly teased in every freaking movie. Like, oh, wait, that's Mephisto. Oh, Mephisto's going to show up here. Mephisto's going to show up there.
Yeah.
And Mephisto.
They're never going to use Mephisto because we've cried. We're the boys who cried Mephisto.
Yeah, I know. I do think this is a weird thing that happened, and I was absolutely part of this problem. Was right after Endgame or right around Endgame, I think there was such hype and it was so easy to speculate and everyone had a pet theory about what the MCU was going to do next or where it was going to go. And people like me who had access and the ability or the free time to start YouTube channels, started channels speculating, this is what's coming next, here's what's coming next, blah, blah, blah. And I think that was kind of for me when I was like, oh, it just kind of got like everyone's saying the same thing. Everyone's speculating Mephisto. And I do think people in Marvel had enough time to course correct and are probably like, they were going to do Mephisto and they're probably like, it's Kang. I think Kang was always coming, but I do think they probably pay attention to enough of that stuff or have people that pay attention to enough of that stuff. And they had enough time to make a course correction and either pulled him or
Well, it's like John
or were
Krasinski.
deliberately fucking with us, which I think they do that too.
Yeah, it's like John Krasinski as Reed Richards. The fan said, "Oh, this has to happen. This has to happen. This has to happen." So they're like, "All right, it's happening in Doctor Strange, and now we're murdering him."
Yes, and I kind of like that stuff. They did it in the comics with Astonishing X-Men, and I don't think you could really do this anymore. But Joss Whedon did this when this is a spoiler for like a 20-year-old comic, so if anyone's salty, I'm sorry. But Joss Whedon and John Cassaday did a run on Astonishing X-Men, and they it was rumored in the book that they were going to bring an X-Men back, and everyone immediately always thinks it's Jean because it's always Jean. And they had John Cassaday work up a cover with the like Cyclops holding a corpse with the optic blast shooting in the sky, and behind him is a giant firebird. So it's like a leaked cover, and they leaked it online, and everybody did exactly what they want him to do. They ran with it, and they said, Jean's coming back. Jean's coming back. It's Jean, Jean, Jean. And then when they go down and they do the reveal and it's Colossus, everyone lost their fucking minds because no one saw it coming. So you can't do that anymore because of the internet. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of thing is like a thing of the past. You know, you can't pull like a 180 on people like that anymore.
Well, I think they did a little bit of that in this movie. They did the time travel thing, but they didn't do time travel the way I would have expected them to do time travel. They did it in a very. They didn't go back and try to erase the snap
Right
from Infinity War. They went back and tried to do something completely different. And in terms of, I guess, a rug pull or something like that, or surprising the audience, they kill Thanos in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
It is, and I remember I forget they do it because then you think, well, they fight him at the end. But when I was in the theater and they killed him, I remember being like, huh? Like, what is the rest of this movie going to be about? They just murdered the motherfucker, you know? And it wasn't even hard. It was easy, you know?
It's the thing I will say about Endgame is that what was clever there is that even though we'll say the Avengers will ultimately win at the end, it's not a complete win. There are still consequences to their first failure. I mean, and they will be exploring that, you know, like in WandaVision and all this stuff that comes afterwards, the blip with people losing like 5 years of their life.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that goes on.
It's especially weird. I think that was a brilliant way to do it. Because there has to be consequences. You can't just undo it because then it's cheap and then nothing matters. So It was an interesting choice. And I think your point about it being clever is kind of like it had to be clever because they weren't going to out-moxie the internet mind think of speculation. So they sidestepped the whole question and did it in a different manner than people like Tom or people who were speculating and kind of figuring out what was coming before they saw it. You know, like they lie to us in trailers. They show footage that they tweak then. It's all different in the computer or whatever. But I think it's time travel is always going to be a difficult thing to do. They did it in an interesting way. But then they benefited by then fucking COVID happening. And then the fucking world went on lockdown. And then you watch Endgame. I watched it during lockdown, and it's fucking weird watching that movie when we were 3 months into lockdown with COVID. So it wasn't that just that a weird thing happened that now is a global event in the largest contemporary movie franchise of all time. It's that it happened at the same time that like a massive global event happened to like the whole planet. You know what I mean? So it's like it made something like the blip like something we could all relate to, an event that happened to everybody. Everyone knows somebody that got COVID. You know, not everyone got COVID, but everyone knows somebody that got it. Everyone knew somebody in the MCU that got blipped. So it's like it's an interesting parallel with the real world, and that's the kind of stuff that always made Marvel like the comics work for me. Was that it was like, oh, something that happens in the world that kind of can affect everybody, or it's like it would mirror, you know, conceivable events. You know what I mean?
Real quick before we lose track of the comments here, Lehman wants to comment on the drink. Tom, I don't know anything about cocktails. That looks like such a great drink that you created, Tom.
Oh, and thank you.
It's one of those drinks that's easy to make at home. So if you're watching Avengers Endgame at home, go to ReVU Cocktails and make your own your own version of The Long Way Home.
Yes. One other note, Lehman, if you're watching and you're looking to make this at home, ideally you want to use some kind of fresh pineapple juice. So you can either buy pineapple and cut it, or chunks of pineapple and put it into a blender and then kind of strain off the pulp. Or if you want to shortcut that process, Trader Joe's makes a really, really good fresh pineapple juice. That is readily available and cheap, and that's a good way of doing it. And the orange liqueur is an orange liqueur of your preference, and you should probably have that in your liquor cabinet anyway.
Oh man, my liquor cabinet's growing. All right, let's go a little bit deeper here. Stephen, you've already touched on a bunch of things. Okay, let's nitpick a little. I'll nitpick, and I'll tell you what my issues were with the film. What threw me off. Okay, again, the time travel stuff. They tried to be very self-aware, and they were talking about how time travel works, but then you have the whole bit with Bruce Banner saying that's not how time travel works. It's not like in the Back to the Future movies, as Dave, is well aware of, or Hot Tub Time Machine. They mention Hot Tub Time Machine, and they make the joke where it's like, now you can't change the past or the future. The past is the present. If you go into the future, the present is your past, and some confusing stuff that was going on in my mind.
Well, that really stuck out to me, that part, because I realized that what the Hulk is saying there is that you can't fix the timeline. You just create alternate realities. And watching it this time, I was like, oh, that's everything they're doing now. As much as we're talking about, we don't know where it's going. They're listless. We know they just keep ringing that multiverse bell. And it's like, oh, Hulk lays it all out of like, this is a multiverse. And of course, we have the scene where Loki escapes with the Tesseract, which then becomes the Loki series on Disney Plus, which then introduces us to variants and really explains the multiverse. But they lay all that out, but then they end it with Steve Rogers just going like, I'm going to stay in the past, and here I am in the present, and I'm old. I'm like, no, you just told me you'd create an alternate reality. We would never see Steve Rogers again.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that
you've been an episode of What If forever.
Yeah, but it's the walking the line between wrapping up all the plot points and trying to make time travel make sense, which I don't think might ever work, and then the Hollywood ending. Somebody had to have a happy ending, because one of the Avengers was going to die. And I knew it was going to be Iron Man or Cap, because we knew Chris Hemsworth was coming back to do more Thor movies, and both Iron Man and Cap had repeatedly said, hey, we want out, we want out, we want out. So
right,
it's just like,
and that's why in Infinity War, Tony almost dies.
Right.
Because
so
that rumor had been going around for so long. They were like, Tony's going to die. Robert Downey Jr.'s done. Tony's going to die. Tony's going to die. And when we were watching Infinity War, when he gets stabbed, I'm like, oh, does Tony die now?
I thought he was dead. And I thought, oh, he's not going to be in the next movie. So
well, it's that Wrath of Khan move where, it leaked that Spock was going to die. So they kill him in the first 5 minutes, and they fake out, and then he gets up and he's like, oh, and Kirk says, aren't you dead? And then you forget about it. So when he does die at the end, you're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
And they did that trick, but just across 2 movies with Tony.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They were very aware, I think, of the kind of the position they were standing in and the swings that were going to come their way in terms of the sci-fi leap they were going to take, tackling time travel, crossovers, multiverses, and all this other stuff. And I think it's like, they still have to give us the Hollywood ending. Somebody has to have a happy ending. And it's like Cap gets to dance with the girl. Because the Russos, remember, they started in Captain America movies. So Winter Soldier through Civil War, and then the last 2 Avengers movies was all of them. That's one big arc for Captain America those guys were telling. And the same thing with Bucky, too. So it's like...
and also,
Sam Wilson.
They just kept building up that love story between Steve and Peggy. And they kept Peggy going... Peggy Carter is the first MCU show. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is the first time they tried it, but it doesn't really connect. Peggy Carter is the first time they bring it back, because Jarvis from the Peggy Carter show is in this, in the flashback.
Yeah.
And we see Peggy Carter working in S.H.I.E.L.D. That shows us that series happened and she's still around. I mean, they tried to bring in Sharon Carter, nobody cared. You know, so like they were building her up to be Steve's love interest, and no, it didn't stick.
Well, they'll bring her back in Captain America. Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah, they brought her.
And we still won't care because we didn't care the last time.
No, they made her evil, and we didn't care.
That's what I'm saying. She was evil. They tried her good. They tried her evil. We just don't care.
Well, it's just a weird thing too with the way the whole bit where you're telling me that Steve ends up being Sharon Carter's uncle. Ultimately,
it's like you kind of start pulling on that thread, and it kind of gets weirder the longer you think about it.
Well, I always think to myself that Steve would spend the next 70 years just as Peggy's house husband. It's just she comes home from S.H.I.E.L.D. with talking about some global crisis, and I just picture Steve coming out of, maybe with like a mustache as a disguise or something like that, just coming out of the kitchen with an apron, asking her to please sit down and have some pot roast while it's still hot.
Yeah, but I do find that weird that Captain America's like, I'm not going to be Captain America anymore.
Yeah.
Even knowing like, my younger self is running around and saving the world, so I don't have to. There's like 60 years of no Captain America.
Yeah, I think it's like they had talked or I had heard it was rumored, and this is maybe speculation, that there was going to be a series or something showing Cap returning the gems to where they all belong. And that wasn't just going to be like a 10-minute thing and he'd go. He would take years to do it so as to do it safely and correctly. But who knows? You know what I mean? I agree. The Cap being just like, that's it. It's like, was he Nomad and was doing secret Cap missions for Nick Fury? Like, I kind of feel like we'll get Cap again still in the MCU. Or maybe Iron Man will come back.
Chris Evans is still young. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was aging out, but Chris Evans, I just saw the trailer for the movie he's got with Ana de Armas. He looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Not as muscular, though. He's not as muscular.
He doesn't need to be, though, right?
No, he doesn't.
MCU workout regimen. He doesn't have to be.
He probably is not eating 14 chickens a day. You know what I mean? Or whatever the fucking workout.
Salmon. Yeah. They eat salmon.
Chris Pratt is not that muscular, and there's another Guardians coming out in a week.
Yeah.
You can't keep that up.
Yeah.
Well, to reference Dave in his Back to the Future shirt, I picture Steve Rogers doing like Marty McFly in Back to the Future 2, just watching his previous self doing shit. Like he's in the same room.
Sandbags on people.
He's always like he always goes to the fights. He knows where they're going to happen, so he's the one throwing his own shield back to him.
The shield doesn't actually do that. It's older Cap throwing
him
it back.
around like, holy shit, I can't believe this.
What if Steve Rogers is the Watcher?
Yeah, I mean that's what they made Bucky, right? The Man on the Wall, or whatever the fuck that Jason Aaron horse shit was in original.
I thought that was
Sin.
Nick Fury.
It was, and then it became
Nick Fury was a Watcher.
So
We
dumb.
have Jeffrey Wright as Watcher.
Yeah.
What If?
Yeah.
Which I would love to see in live action one day.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If we talked about the Russo brothers' background, and I mentioned this all the way back when we talked about Winter Soldier, is their, and I think I've mentioned it on Infinity War, their background in TV, in Community. And this is, you could break this movie up into John said you could break it up into 3 parts, and each one of those 3 parts, the dealing with trauma, has its own kind of arc and conclusion and character progress. And then the Time Heist has its own arc and progress and kind of catastrophic moment with the Soul Stone and conclusion where Black Widow dies kind of horrifically and dramatically. And that's the conclusion of the Time Heist portion, where you have this catharsis with Tony and Howard, and then you have the conclusion of the Hawkeye and Black Widow arc, and ending Scarlett Johansson's tenure in the MCU.
Except for an entire movie that
nobody saw,
which is unfortunate because I've heard that, like, I know Jeremy Renner had like a terrible accident, and I hope he's okay, but like I've heard he's kind of like a psychopath, and it seemed like Scarlett Johansson,
like a psychopath that would hang out of a moving snowcat.
Oh, I don't know how he got injured, but I mean, I heard he was like putting loaded guns in his wife's mouth and stuff like this, like fucked up stuff. I don't know about allegations. I don't know. But it also never seemed like he never felt like a good fit for the MCU. Like I never really cared about Hawkeye in the MCU. Jeremy Renner to me is just kind of like he could have been anybody, you know, any action guy just got stuck in that role. Scarlett Johansson actually looked like she wanted to be there. You know what I mean? It's like to me, it seems like they should have killed Hawkeye and kept her, you know?
Yeah, except when you look back, like the Hawkeye Disney Plus show is better than the Black Widow movie.
Oh, yeah.
Would a Black Widow Disney Plus show have been better than a Black Widow movie? You know, like I think they could have made the Black Widow show based on the Mark Waid, Chris Samnee run. That would have been a great show. Jeremy Renner kind of sucks. They could have done that Hawkeye show without him. It would have been better without him. You know.
Well, they have a Kate Bishop now.
Yeah, there. They could have just done her show.
I was going to say Black Widow was riffing on James Bond. I mean, she's even watching Moonraker in the movie.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, Hawkeye was a home alone in the MCU. So
yeah,
I think the fact that we talked about like there's sort of a malaise or like indifference to the MCU now post Endgame, or at least post, you know, with the last few films. Obviously, No Way Home was a huge deal. But the fact that they did a movie about Black Widow after her character was killed off, like a prequel. Obviously, a big part of the reason they did that was to set up future characters and storylines for, you know, future films, like, you know, introducing Florence Pugh's character.
Yeah.
But was there any reason that movie could not have been made while her charger was still alive? You know,
From what I heard, that was in development a long, long time.
Yeah, I think it was part of COVID, if I'm not mistaken, too. Was that when COVID happened, so many of the MCU, like John had made a point. When we went to see Doctor Strange, I didn't notice it when we saw the movie, but when we got out of the movie, John made a point. He said there's a scene where Doctor Strange, America Chavez, and somebody else sit in a diner and they have a quick conversation about Spider-Man. I think Wong's the other person. And it looks like they grabbed those three people real quick, put them on a plane in New York City, got them dressed up, put them in a diner, and shot a scene to make sense for a movie that was supposed to come out before Spider-Man, but ended up coming out after Spider-Man. And it's a scene that looked clearly injected into the movie because now it didn't make sense because it was out of order. And I think the movies that came out after Endgame, that came out around COVID, got shifted out of order, but they still had to come out whenever they were done.
Scarlett Johansson sued Disney because they put her movie on Disney Plus because of COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you're right. Doctor Strange was supposed to come out before No Way Home. So then they squeezed in this scene about like, oh, we just met Spider-Man. And that's something we can talk about when we get to No Way Home. When they get to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum and there's snow everywhere, and they're just like, oh, we left the door open. I'm like, you didn't spend that much to cover a set with snow to do a throwaway joke. I think there was probably a point that connected it tighter to Doctor Strange. And they were like, well, we can't reshoot the snowy scene.
Right.
But you're right. It starts to come off the tracks after Endgame. And it's like, it's one of the things that makes Endgame so brilliant is that it builds and builds and builds and builds and it caps off everything. And it is a trick they can't seem to do again.
Yeah, and I don't think they should try. I don't want to see them set up the villain and it's a big buildup and the whole thing. It's like, you know, everyone was like, who is it? Is it Kang? Who's the next big villain? And it's like, who cares? There's always going to be villains. That's how fucking superhero movies work. It's the setting, the endless speculation that everything has to build and connect and be a thing. I don't really I disagree with that premise. Just make good superhero movies. That's it. They don't even have to be superhero movies. You know what I mean? They keep talking they want to do these genre movies, and Doctor Strange 2 is going to be a horror movie. And it's like, okay, they're all still in a Marvel box. That's just in like the horror corner of the box. You know what I mean? It's like, get outside of the box. Try something. Like, I keep hearing, I haven't seen it yet, but Werewolf by Night is supposed to be like crazy, weird, and wild.
Yes,
and
I was right about to bring that up.
That's more of that, you know?
It's pretty far out. It's almost like it's the 70s and you picked up a Werewolf by Night issue.
Yeah,
you
and
don't expect to see Spider-Man in that thing. And
that's cool. And they should try to do more stuff like that then.
Okay. We're running in the hour and a half mark, and I don't want to belabor things, but I
you want to see some toys then?
Yeah, okay, let's talk about some toys, and then I have one last question I want to throw out to the panel. So yes, let's talk about the MCU ReVU toy feature.
Yeah, there were multiple sets of Marvel Legends. At this point, Marvel Legends is as big as Star Wars in terms of character selection, and that's not even counting doing figures based on the comic books. So there were multiple lines based on both Infinity War and Endgame, but the ones I brought out were my favorite ones. They were actually done much later. Like Star Wars, now Hasbro can keep going back to these movies years later and bring out new characters, and they'll sell because these have become iconic moments. So, but there was a 2-pack, I believe it was just last year, 2022. That's my favorite because it has a snapping Thanos, and if you'll notice, he has the Hulk hand, and it has no Infinity Stones in it, even though he's snapping it because he's at the moment where he doesn't realize it, and he has no Infinity Stones because they included the Death of Tony Stark figure, which does have the Infinity Stones, and he's got the battle damage on his face. And when I saw this, there was a Hot Toys of Tony Stark like this that lights up, and he's $450. And I'm like, yeah, I get why. It's such a classic moment, I think, in movie history, that when I saw this, I was like, yes, give me Thanos again. Give me Tony Stark again. This is a figure that'll probably never leave my collection just because that moment, and we didn't even cover it. The Death of Tony Stark. Yeah. When you see it the first time on screen, you're like, oh, I'm going to remember this forever.
Yeah.
And when you think about it too, the scene where he goes, I am Iron Man, that wasn't even what they initially filmed.
He went through 20 different lines.
That's crazy.
Yep. They had to go back and reshoot it to actually have Tony Stark say, I am Iron Man, which
the fact that they didn't think of that first is mind-boggling.
Yes.
Yeah.
But perfectly bookends Iron Man 1. And of course, that's how he finishes that's his last line in the first Iron Man movie. That will be his last line in Endgame. And that scene where Pepper says, okay, Tony, you can rest now. She always knew that he was trying to, again, build a shield of armor around the world. It's just, again, it's moments like that make you forgive all the nitpicking.
And make you forgive that Iron Man built fucking time machine on like a dare and in the evening. It's like, what the fuck was he doing for fucking 5 years?
He was raising that girl who was stealing his helmet.
God. Well, then people shouldn't have fucking kids, I guess, because he could have fucking built paradise if he just cried about Peter Parker more.
I'm sorry, Tom, what was that?
I was saying, what was he doing for 5 years when you have a kid? It's like I think John is the only other parent on this show that can understand what were you doing for 5 years. It's like, but you have kids, it takes over your life.
Oh yeah, you want to hear how my stand-up career ended?
Yeah.
Wow. And it's funny too because Morgan Stark, I keep waiting for them to do something with her. Morgan Stark, as many might know, they actually have a scene with an older Morgan Stark where Tony sees his daughter as an older, as a young woman, and they cut that scene altogether. They changed it out for the bit where he's doing the recording and talking to his younger daughter.
Well, they said that was confusing because it was a brand new actress no one had seen before.
Yeah. And then you're thinking they're going to bring her back at some point because you've got to bring Morgan Stark back. I mean, at some point. You have to have the legacy of Iron Man continuing because then you of course introduce Ironheart in the last Black Panther movie, but you never have an official passing of the torch to her from Iron Man like in the comic books.
Yeah, I'd actually kind of want to see Rhodey as Iron Man. It's like I don't think they will. I think they're just going to make him War Machine or Iron Patriot or whatever, but they did it in the comics, and
Armor Wars is now a movie that was going to be a series.
Right, but like they're talking about doing Secret Wars as like one of the next big Avengers movies, and it's like Rhodey was in Secret Wars. Tony Stark didn't go to Battleworld and fight Doom as a god. That was Rhodey as Iron Man, And it's like that would be cool just to have him as Iron Man if they do end up doing Secret Wars and they're going to do anything like that, which they probably won't. But if they did, that'd be really sweet.
Oh, all right. So talking about that, let me throw this last thing out to the crew because, of course, we're now going to be entering the next phase of the MCU review. We've passed Endgame, as Steven said, as we've already said. A lot of us, I know for me, Endgame was the train got into the station, and I was happy with the ride, and I got off the train, and I let it go, and maybe I'll get back on again. Who knows? But as far as the MCU review goes, an interesting wrinkle has been created by our good friends at Disney Plus. The Spider-Man films, namely the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, are now on the Marvel page. And with Spider-Man No Way Home, which we will get to at one point.
Well, Far From Home would be our next movie.
Next one.
Our next one is Spider-Man, no matter what you say.
Well, here's the thing. The Marvel Studios has cleverly folded the Sam Raimi and the Andrew Garfield, or the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield films into the MCU narrative. So my question to the crew, and I will put out to the viewers of the MCU review, is, do we talk about the Spider-Man films outside of the Tom Holland ones?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get John to say, no, don't talk about Spider-Man. I'm trying to picture the words in my head, but I just can't imagine that sequence coming out in the order that having.
Not unless I'm already talking about Indiana Jones.
Yeah, maybe. Right.
Well, John had Dave backing him up right away. What do you say, Tom?
I think we need to get through. At a minimum, we need to get through Far From Home before we do the Raimi ones. I think doing them ahead of No Way Home would be good. I'm gonna have to think of a complete wildly different cocktails for the five. The three Raimi films and the two Andrew Garfield films. I already have as you guys know, I already have the Far From Home drink already lined up and ready for beta testing. So I think for Amazing Spider-Man 2, I'll just use a can of cream of mushroom soup or something like that.
And hit yourself in the head with it.
For Spider-Man 3, you have to come up with something that's black and oily and viscous.
The Venom drink,
and sorely disappointing.
something Ferna Branca.
All right. I think we're doing the Spider-Man movies, I guess.
It looks like.
I think doing them right ahead of No Way Home would I think be the ideal place to start.
All right.
Because that's technically, I think, if you were gonna put them on the timeline, the Marvel MCU, the MCU isn't a multiverse until it becomes a multiverse. So those movies fit where it becomes a multiverse.
Well, then, I think because Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse actually references Doctor Strange. So are we going to be talking about the animated movies too?
There is a rumor that all three live-action Spider-Man are in Across the Spider-Verse.
We'll have to see Across the Spider. It's going to take a while to get to Across the Spider-Verse.
When does that come out?
We already passed Into the Spider-Verse. If we need to go back, that was 2018.
Yeah.
I was about to say, but we could fold that in with the other Spider-Man movies.
That's the only that is the only Marvel movie to win the Oscar for Best Picture. The one best animated film. It beat Pixar.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah. And it's probably the best Spider-Man movie I've seen.
Yeah.
Just like the Batman Lego movie is the best Batman movie I've ever seen.
I think my argument is the same as the way they say that the best place to watch the prequel Star Wars trilogy is between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
Why? Go on, Dave.
Yeah.
That's the machete order.
Yeah, the machete order. Yeah, John's right. It's the machete order.
Yeah,
So
because
you
when Darth Vader says, "I am your father," then you stop and go back and you see why Darth Vader's his
Right.
father.
Okay.
All right. Well, that'll be to discuss. So if anyone has thoughts on how we should review that, by all means, please comment on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We read everything.
and I need to know which can of soup for the second Amazing Spider-Man movie.
Susan says, okay, despite Susan's on board with us talking about the Spider-Man films. Thank you, Susan. All right. I think that's, I just say, it just happened to me this past weekend. John said, hey, Quantum Mania is on Disney Plus. I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm going to watch it. And then I couldn't find it. And yet all the 3 Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and the first Andrew Garfield film were on there. I'm like, what the what? I don't remember them.
They just left Netflix.
Yeah.
They had all
when
been on
did they
Netflix.
announce this? Yeah. I thought they would have ended up on Stars.
Probably were at one point. But if you needed to catch up on Ash versus Evil Dead, that's where your subscription dollar goes.
Yeah, that's right. Tom, a drink must be named the Web Slinger. Susan has that suggestion there, the Web Slinger. I like it. All right.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up with our final thoughts on Avengers Endgame. Oh my God. Dave, you are an interesting fellow. The things that you can find. Let me put this on here so everyone can see what I'm talking about. That Dave shared in our private chat.
Well, it's not private anymore.
Yeah, it's the mushroom martini.
I feel like Tom is insane enough to try this, to try to recreate it.
Well, let me take a look at the recipe here. Let's see. Ice infused with dry mushrooms, dry vermouth, marinated mushroom for garnish. I mean,
that actually sounds pretty good.
That's not I mean, any kind of gin infusion, like depending on what you try, it all depends on the mushrooms, I guess, you're using. If you want to add a little, I mean, all gin uses some weird roots and things like that in it anyway. That's somebody's favorite martini. I guarantee you that's somebody's favorite. And that's a real martini, not like an appletini or an espresso martini is not a real martini. That's just a regular martini with some infused gin. So, when
they reboot Bond, this is what they're going to do. This is how they're going to reimagine.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we're still waiting on hearing. The word is that there's going to be no talk about who's going to be playing Bond for at least another year or two. So
They don't even have a script yet, so they're not even close to casting. So,
I don't know. Well, I guess you can wait. Let things settle. Let movie theater chains get their act back together.
Yeah.
Okay. We're hitting the hour and a half mark. So let's go round the horn again and give our final thoughts on Avengers Endgame, whatever you weren't able to bring up during the discussion. Let's start with you, Tom.
We talked about them sticking the landing and nailing a lot of the plot points and tying off loose ends. But I think key to that is the emotional arcs of it. Like, it's not just satisfying because we hardly talked about Thor. Thor gets an entire arc to himself about dealing with guilt and shame and failure. Really, like, going to a very, we can laugh about quote unquote fat Thor all we want, but that is a deep, horrible depression that he's in at having failed at seemingly the one thing he was really good at in his life. So that kind of coming to something like an emotional conclusion, bringing back Freya and doing that, doing the Steve, doing the Tony, even with Bruce, and getting some kind of a emotional feeling there with losing Natasha. That's hard to do. And I think a lesser movie would have avoided that, or would have done it ham-fistedly and focused on the minute mechanics of the plot. And to the Russo brothers' extraordinary credit, they didn't, and managed to find places in a 3-hour movie to pull that off. So hats off for them for knowing when and how to take the time and how to fit that in so we can have a real emotional catharsis rather than just like, oh, hey, great, it worked, feeling at the end of the movie, which is how I remember leaving the theater for the first time, is just being emotionally drained.
Dave?
Actually, I'm surprised Tom did mention the point early in the film that because half the population is gone, the Mets become contracted.
Oh, that's right. Well,
not enough New Yorkers to sustain 2 MLB franchises.
right. Well, we talked about we talked about this on a little one-on-one chat at some point about how something to the effect that the American and National Leagues had plenty of teams when the population had almost the same number of teams that they do today when the population was half the size in the United States. So they didn't need to contract the Mets, but if you have an opportunity to contract the Mets, why wouldn't you get rid of the Mets? So they just got rid of them on general principle.
Ouch. Ouch. Well, young Peter Parker's not around to see that happen, which everyone knows Peter Parker's a Mets fan.
Yeah.
Steven.
I would say, to kind of talk about what Tom was saying, is it's that it shouldn't have worked. And the reason I think a lot of it does work isn't just that the Russos were kind of like the only people that might have been able to pull that off, is that like it works emotionally because they got good actors to play the characters. Like, you care about Robert Downey Jr. when, like, my sister-in-law still cries when he dies, like cries. And it's like, she is not a crier at all. So it's like, and I think it's the longevity that they could keep these guys in these roles for 10 years at a time. So we do watch Robert Downey Jr. be Iron Man for years and see him develop these relationships. Like, we got to see, they split him and Captain America up in Infinity War so they don't interact at all, and then they put them back together for this one. So it's like, I mean, he gets to have a whole thing with his dad. Why? Just so they can fucking tear at our heartstrings. It's like they did a lot of fan service stuff, but I think it worked because this was the movie to do it in. You know what I mean? This movie was a big enough risk anyway. They didn't need to. A little bit of fan service was kind of grease the wheels in case this wasn't going to be the soft landing that it was, because this very much could have been an absolute clown show of a movie.
That talk about Robert Downey Jr., that scene when he comes back from space and he's angry at Cap and saying, you weren't there, you failed, da 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 da. That was a complete improvisation on Robert Downey Jr.'s part.
And all that stuff just absolutely works. It's like it's the same kind of thing we really didn't see too much of because they broke the Avengers up so quickly. We didn't get a lot of what I would say, like, post Avengers 1, pre-Age of Ultron Avengers. The Avengers you see at the beginning of Age of Ultron, that's the Avengers firing on all cylinders. They're going on raids. They're taking on Hydra camps. It's easy. It's not a problem. Like, they know how to take the Hulk off the leash and how to put the leash back on the Hulk. It's like they figured it out. They're using Jarvis. There's a satellite. There's drones. It's like we saw that for so briefly. And now the Avengers is a whole different thing. And it's always going to be an evolving, changing thing, which is good. It's just we got to see a lot of the characters standing around talking to each other and interacting, and they put a lot of different personalities in the room together that they don't normally put in the room together. And it was good that some characters got to interact with each other before they exit stage left and aren't going to be seen again, So I just think it was a huge undertaking. It kind of worked. I think the problem with it is if you haven't seen the MCU up until this point, the amount of work you have to do for this movie to work for you is probably too much for most people. Like, we watched this live. We saw these movies when they came out, when they were released. If I was born like 5 years ago, I don't know that I could watch 20 fucking movies like this. It's a lot of work, you know? It is a lot of work to commit to getting the payoff that we all enjoyed, having been fortunate enough to be at the right age to watch these movies and come up with these movies, you know?
Well, Disney disagrees with you, and they're hoping that in Disney Plus that you will sit down and you will watch,
Yes, they do.
all those films. John,
You only get to make a movie like this when you have the utmost confidence that your audience is going to stay with you. I'm reminded again of the two franchises I brought up at the beginning of the episode. Return of the King opens quiet, ends quiet. It opens on a worm, the smallest thing it could possibly open on before there's all this spectacle, and it ends with Sam walking into his house carrying one of his kids. This movie opens with Hawkeye teaching his daughter how to shoot an arrow and ends with Steve and Peggy dancing in their own living room. It opens small, and you only get to do that if you're not worried about the audience walking out. And it also reminds you of a conversation we had just yesterday when we were talking about Picard, about how Star Trek, while always being kind of a niche show, knew its audience was never going to leave. So they would have a cliffhanger that was like Data getting tea. Because they were like, where are you going to go, nerd? And, they knew you weren't going to change the channel. And you can only do that once. And I think, I don't know that Marvel's going to be in that position again. And we keep bringing up, they haven't hit the heights. They haven't hit the heights. The one height they hit was Spider-Man No Way Home, which, again, not a Disney movie. So it's almost like Disney Marvel never hit this again. Disney working with Sony did this again, but not quite to the height we'd ever see it again.
And it wasn't just that. It was almost kind of like they replicated the same success, right? Because they piggybacked on every Spider-Man movie that came before to make that Spider-Man movie work, right? So it's like,
I remember you and I said when No Way Home came out, I said, this is like Avengers Endgame if Avengers Endgame was just Spider-Man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I liked it more.
Yeah.
and my last thought then would be that with Avengers Endgame, Marvel will reach a height that, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to ever hit it again. I don't know. Maybe it will at some point down the line for a different audience. We've talked about this with other films, with a lot of the stuff that happens post Endgame. There's a lot of stuff that will be coming that, while entertaining, is not going to hit the same chord with me, I know, and not hitting the same chord with a lot of guys, a lot of folks who took the ride from Iron Man to Endgame. So, but that's not to say that any of it's bad. It's just, what is it? That scene in Friends when Ross has to confess to Rachel that he had sex with another woman, and she goes, "So what was it like? What was it like?" And all those friends are going, "No, it was terrible. It was worse. Say it was bad." And he just goes, "It was different." I think that's what it's like now. It just feels different, which is fine. It's fine. We're not going to.
The Marvel movies now are like Jennifer Aniston dumping you.
Pretty much, yes. I feel like Jennifer Aniston has dumped me, which that's a common thread. Anyway, next up on the next MCU review, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man Far From Home.
Which one?
Spider-Man Far From Home, because that one does fit. It will be the epilogue to Avengers Endgame. And then after that, we get into a whole new phase. And I think we're going to be shuffling the deck with the MCU review. I'm thinking about we're going to do things a little bit differently than we have before. Got to keep things fresh, just like Marvel's doing. Tell us what you have been thinking about us so far here on the MCU Review Facebook page, on the YouTube page, and on Twitch TV. So before we go, let's go around the horn one last time. Tell us your social media handles, Stephen Brown.
You're on mute, Steven.
Thanks. I'm terrible at this. Social media, I've got Brave Butter Pecan, and that'll be on Instagram. But this week specifically, I'm plugging my buddy is running a Kickstarter for a documentary he's working on about the Galloping Ghost Arcade, and we're doing a live stream tomorrow. I'm going to be playing Dungeons and Dragons, I guess, with a couple comedians and the inventor or the artist of Qbert, the arcade game, who's a big Dungeons and Dragons player. So the streaming will be Wednesday, April 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time on twitch.tv/weavethetail. And that's all available. Ghost Lord and the Quest for Dark Presence is the name of the documentary and the Kickstarter.
Excellent. Tom?
You can find It's Been a Long Time and all of the cocktails from the MCU ReVU and the Top Men Indiana Jones podcast at ReVU Cocktails on the Instagram app.
Dave?
I am on Instagram at Pinto_Noir.
Why do we want to follow you?
Because I post lots of photos of my old goblin of a dog.
I love that little goblin.
Most
John?
people do.
Yes.
I am not on my book on Twitter and Instagram for as long as Twitter lasts. Right now, I'm actually getting added on Twitter. I am getting roasted about how I had no voice on the last episode with Steven and Craig.
Ooh.
That was rough, man. I was listening to it. That was rough.
It was rough. Yeah, I that's what having bronchitis for 6 weeks will get you, my friends.
You sound great
yeah.
now.
Thank you. I slept the entire weekend.
Yeah, that'll help.
Yes, I've just been tweeted more Harpo, less Groucho. So that's how that's going. But if you want to listen to the show, we do Caffeinated Comics every week. Elliot and I are there mainly always. Steven and I are there mostly always. But we cover all the news that's fit to geek. And my God, we've had a lot to say about Star Trek over the last couple of months. So if you want to hear our thoughts on the Picard finale, or you want to hear us interview Doug Drexler, who is a designer on Star Trek ever since the 80s and worked on Picard. That's a great place to find us. Anywhere you get your podcast, just listen to the Caffeinated Comics podcast, which includes the audio of MCU ReVU and Top Men.
And I am Elliot Serrano, 2 L's, 2 T's, and 2 R's across all social media platforms. If you follow me on TikTok, it's Elliot.Serrano. Of course, you can hear me not only on MCU ReVU and Caffeinated Comics, but also the Top Men Indiana Jones podcast. We will be talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on our next episode. That should be happening probably the beginning of May. We wanted to do it by the end of April, but it's going to happen probably the beginning of May. Still lining up a guest for that episode. I'm saying it now. If Indy dies in Dial of Destiny, I'm rioting. A riot of one.
I've yet to see one riot about a character dying. They've been keeping Daryl Dixon alive for 20 years because
this will
of
be the first
riot
one, goddammit.
I want to see a riot. There was no Tony Stark riot.
Yeah. All right. That's a good point. All right. To everyone who was watching us on the StreamYard, on our StreamYard platform, Facebook, Twitch TV, and YouTube. Thank you, Lehman. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for those watching who did not comment. Still, we appreciate it. Whether you're watching us live, watching this video as part of our archive, listening to us on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, please give us a thumbs up, give us a like, share, subscribe wherever you can. Pass us on to all your friends. Thank you so much. Yes, Lehman, wishing a good evening to you as well. Until next time, this has been Elliot Serrano for John Clark, Dave Pino, Stephen Brown, and Tom Jetner. Have a great week, everyone.